everyone. My name is Mary Ta, and this is my husband, Lars Oliver Hipko. And we wanted to welcome you as our first guests in our new showroom because we... Thank you. In fact, we just opened an hour ago. And because of my marketing director genius, Shireen Elgazar, right there, yes, she said, you know, the first people who come into the showroom should be the people from the city of West Hollywood, because that's who we are. We are a member of the community of the city of West Hollywood, and today this is the last panel discussion for DIEM, which is Design Intersects Everything Made. And we want to thank you to the City of West Hollywood for being such a wonderful host to Minoti, which we've had for the last 10 years. And in celebration of the next 10 years, we're welcoming our new showroom here, which is called Mass Beverly. And you're our first guest, and we wanted to welcome you with open arms and tell you that we're no longer just furniture. Now we are a design 360, so we can do everything. Welcome.
I'll pick up from there. Good evening. My name is Bronwyn Cosgrave. I'm a fashion historian. I was generously offered to chair this panel by Mallory Roberts-Morgan, who deserves a round of applause for curating today, with her friend Frances, whose surname escapes me right now. But Mary, thank you for offering us your stunning space. I love Los Angeles. I lived here for 3 years, on and off, writing a book which is called Made for Each Other, Fashion and the Academy Awards. It's the first fashion history of the Oscars. It came out in 2005 when the red carpet was really about the Oscars, the Golden Globes, maybe throw in the Cannes Film Festival, not much more. Our talk this evening is really design influences everything made for the red carpet. It's as simple as that. And when I thought about the red carpet, I'm going to read you a list of actually what it is. The Golden Globes, the BAFTAs, the SAG Awards, the Oscars, the Césars, Tribeca Film Festival, Cannes, Venice, the MTV Awards, the Emmys, TIFF, the New York Film Festival, Palm Springs, Sundance, Berlin, the Grammys, the MTV Awards, not to mention the coffee run, a trip to Gelson's or Bristol Farms, and the walk from the limo to late night talk show green rooms. So it has exploded over the last 10 years. Mallory asked me to gather together a panel of experts, and I can kid you not, I have the 3 world experts on the red carpet. They have been observing it over the last few decades. I met them all personally doing so, and I would like them to introduce themselves and just give us a little background about who you are and what you do. Merle Ginsberg.
Hi. Thank you. Merle Ginsberg is my name, and I am currently the senior style writer at the Hollywood Reporter, which is really, you know, ground zero for where Hollywood and the red carpet come together. That is what we do. That is all that we do. And we do it really from the inside out. But I go back to, I started in New York writing about music for Rolling Stone and The Village Voice, and I was a producer at MTV. But then my life started when I got into fashion. And I started working in the West Coast Bureau of Women's Wear Daily in 1992. My first Oscars was 1992.
Save some of that.
Yeah, don't worry. But I do remember being out there and...
Don't talk about it yet.
Okay. And, Women's Wear, Harper's Bazaar, and lots of other magazines. And so I've been doing the red carpet for 22 years.
Marcy Medina.
I am Marcy Medina. I'm the West Coast Bureau Chief of WWD, aka Women's Wear Daily. We are a 104-year-old trade paper covering the fashion industry, and I've been out here on the West Coast since 1998. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Which is when I had the pleasure of meeting Merle Ginsburg.
We worked together?
Yeah, we overlapped for about 3 or 4 years, maybe more, at WWD, and so know each other very well from the red carpet.
Squished together.
Exactly, we've been very close for many years, still are. And what can I say? I love watching these women come down the carpet and seeing them at Bristol Farms across the street and everywhere else. It really is a really fun and incredible place to be and a fun thing to do.
Monica.
Hi there, my name is Monica Corcoran-Harrell, and I write for any number of publications. I cover fashion for Deadline Hollywood, the red carpet, but I've also written a few books, more on the other side, the backstage, if you will. I recently wrote a book with Rachel Zoe, so we got into the business of styling and her own personal style, and I also co-authored a book with Janie Bryant, who's the costume designer of Mad Men. So I've seen that side as well, and Bronwyn and I were talking about this earlier, we'll touch on it later. Costume designers are now also designing for the red carpet at times. I've known Merle and Marcy for many years, and it's funny when I think about us on the red carpet, I think of us as war reporters. And I don't want to belittle war reporting in any way, but there's a lot of elbowing and hip checking that goes on when you're trying to get someone to interview. I think we've all always been gracious.
You're in the trenches.
And it's only become more so. I mean, the red carpet has, it's like the movie Jaws. You're going to need a bigger boat. You're going to need a bigger red carpet because nowadays there's a red carpet everywhere. And it seems like an endless parade of actors and actresses walking down it. So I'm excited to be here and talk about it.
So I would like to, if everyone could please silence their cell phones and any other mechanical gizmos that might beep or whatever. I'm here to give a historical perspective on how this happened. I will do it as briefly as possible. I could hold the floor for a good 2 hours. I'm going to start with someone like Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's daughter, pageantry. I'll fast forward to 1929. Louis B. Mayer instigated the Oscars as an awards ceremony, really to champion the film studios who made California the center of the world's movie making. No one wanted to go. No woman wanted to sit around on an evening with these fat cat studio moguls. And it wasn't really until 1939 when David O. Selznick, who was the son-in-law of Louis B. Mayer, swept the Academy Awards with 13 Oscar nominations for Gone with the Wind, that it really mattered from a fashion perspective. Because what David O. Selznick did was he hired a designer to dress Vivien Leigh, Olivia de Havilland. I don't think Hattie McDaniel was in the mix, but he wanted his stars looking red carpet perfect, not just for the film's premiere in Atlanta, but also at the Oscars. He hired someone named Irene Lenz Gibbons, who was the in-house designer at Bullock's Wilshire, which was the classiest department store out in Los Angeles, and she also freelanced for the studios. Vivien Leigh won the Oscar for Best Actress and really was the benchmark. She not only had a dress that was made exclusively for her, it fit her, she looked amazing from every angle, but she was also wearing Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry that her husband, I think he was her boyfriend at the time, Laurence Olivier, gave her. So she had it down, and you could go forward, I would say, to Marlene Dietrich in 1947. The new look came along. She was enamored with Kristen Dior, and in 1951, when she was presenting the Best Foreign Film Prize, she had Kristen Dior make a dress especially for her. What's the lesson? Get something made if you want it to be memorable. And at that point, really, the red carpet divided. It was always about the Oscars, and it suddenly became about fashion designers and costume designers jostling for supremacy on the red carpet. And the phenomenal thing, I think, that costume designers, Edith Head, Gilbert Adrian, Travis Banton, Ori Kelly did for a star going to the Oscars, was that they understood their identity. They had a really strong relationship with the star. They knew what their body was like. They knew how to dress them, full stop. They also would occasionally convey a sense of the character that they were nominated for so that that image would carry on in photographs. Along with that, they also manifested the spirit of the studio, and that was Paramount polish, MGM grandeur, and really that stark quality that Warner Brothers films were known for. I would push forward to the early 70s with Halston, and he really came along after Hubert de Givenchy and Audrey Hepburn, Mark Bohan, who dressed a handful of designers on behalf of stars on behalf of Christian Dior. And Halston really dressed New Hollywood, as it was known in the 70s. This very liberated woman, Angelica Houston, Liza Minnelli, Lauren Hutton, and made them look completely glamorous, and also introduced an American sensibility to the red carpet. 1987, I'm almost done. Cher came along in Bob Mackie, and something wonderful that I remembered was that the fashion consultant, it was actually 1986, the fashion consultant of the Oscars that year was Nolan Miller, whose studio, the late Nolan Miller, the costume designer and designer, whose studio was across the street. And I went to interview him there 10 years ago. And he told me the story. He wrote a letter to everyone going to the Oscars saying, I want everyone to look their best. He was a very sort of, he was a dandy, really. He said, you know, I want everyone to put their best foot forward. Cher got the letter, ripped it up, went to see Bob Mackie. He designed her this crazy mohawk costume that, you know, referenced her Indian heritage and also that sort of punk sensibility that was going on at the time for the last 10 years. I think really Cher signified that you could wear anything on the red carpet. We have the meat dress, I'll say that again, the meat dress that Lady Gaga wore, and also, of course, Bjork's fantastic swan outfit. You don't see that anymore, really, at the Oscars, but it's there. You can still do it. Then we get to 1989, and I'm going to hand it over to Merle. Suddenly, the Oscars and award ceremonies that were coming up started to be about brands. And Merle, I'd like you to explain what happened.
I'll never forget going to the Oscars for Women's Wear Daily in 1992, and I was screaming to everybody, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? And other reporters were yelling at me saying, why are you asking that? Who cares? And the Academy was really angry. They're like, this is not a fashion show. We don't want people asking that. The very next year, I was still screaming, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? And suddenly the other reporters were running up to me going, how do you spell Armani? Like, it seemed to change.
That's a famous quote, right?
It seemed to change in, you know, it could be 1 year, it could be 2 or 3, but Giorgio Armani suddenly became the king of Europe in the 80s and revolutionized fashion by taking it out of the hands of Paris and New York and doing these slouchy suits for men and putting women in all these neutral stone colors, paring everything down. In the 90s, particularly the early 90s, was all about this Belgian, Italian minimalism, simplicity, not a lot of fit, like a lot of sort of long shift dresses.
Anti-fashion.
Yeah, exactly. Coming out of punk in a way, but glamorous and beautiful fabrics and very expensive. And suddenly Armani, who was dressing a lot of Hollywood agents, because all these men wanted to wear Armani suits, realized, why not dress the stars too? And he developed personal relationships with the women who were really hot at the time. Jodie Foster, Annette Bening, Michelle Pfeiffer, and also with Richard Gere. And so these were kind of the happening stars of the moment. The year that Jodie Foster won the Oscar for Silence of the Lambs, she was wearing, I kid you not, the ugliest dress I have ever seen.
A blue.
Yes. She bought it. She
strapless.
said something about I was walking down the street in Paris and I saw it in a window. It was ill-fitting. It was poofy. It didn't look like her. The next year, she was streamlined in Armani, like, I don't know if it was a dress or a tuxedo suit, but it was perfectly fit for her body, and it was a different person. And from then on in, she wore Armani nonstop. Same with Michelle Pfeiffer and Annette Bening, and they sometimes wore tuxedos, which was incredible, the idea of a woman wearing pants to the Oscars, or beautiful gowns. And then I remember Julia Roberts showing up when she started to be hot, and she was wearing a Richard Tyler, like very early 1990s shift dress that was very kind of loose and Belgian. But suddenly brands, Armani started it all. Richard Tyler, who was an LA designer, jumped in the game. And then all of a sudden, Gianni Versace, realized that if you have the Oscars, which is, now it's billions of people watching on TV, then it wasn't nearly that. But it was still pre-internet, the biggest international event that there could be, fashion-wise, because Cannes wasn't televised.
Marcy, I want to throw it over to you. And really, it's fair to say that the red carpet became this alternative runway. How did it work behind the scenes? How did this actually were designers targeting, the stars that they wanted to dress? Who was making it happen for them out here?
It was very behind the scenes, Bronwyn, as you said, and Merle, sort of began this conversation with Armani. They were one of the first to really have a, quote, behind the scenes team out here, and still do. Making those things happen, going to every event, reaching out to the managers, the agents, watching every movie just as fervently as you would if you were a film critic at Variety. I mean, these people who work in fashion have to keep track of these things too, because it's always every designer's question. When I meet with people from all over the world when they're in LA for something, they say, who do you like? Who are the most up-and-coming actors? Who should we be dressing? So therefore, I watch every movie and every television show, because we all know TV stars of today may be the movie stars of tomorrow. I mean, it really starts at the beginning. So there is a lot of just due diligence, as you said. There's a lot of sort of curation and personal taste, I think. But
list making alone.
Exactly. Merle and I have made many lists together for Women's Wear Daily. So that's sort of how it happens, and people can either sometimes they'll have a staffer out here, as some of you in the audience I know do this, or they'll send sort of an ambassador from their Paris or Milan headquarters to be out here during the year, during busy times, or even just throughout the year, calling this information, getting it back to Europe, getting it back to New York. And obviously the designers such as Richard Tyler, Nolan Miller, the people that were based here had the advantage because they were here, like I said, they could be at the supermarket with some of these people. So,
Please wear my work.
So, so that's sort of, I guess does that answer your question?
Sure, yeah.
In terms of behind the scenes, but you had asked too about fashion, the Oscars sort of becoming a runway. I mean, the Oscars have been televised for years, and much more so, earlier than runway shows were. I mean, that kind of footage, I remember you had to wait until Saturday morning at 10 a.m. to watch this stuff a week later on Style with Elsa Clench on CNN. That was the only time you could actually see a model on video walking down a runway. Otherwise you had to wait 3 months to see these things in Vogue. Or, for the 20,000 subscribers that Women's Wear had at the time, maybe could see them 4 days later.
Yeah, Style.com,
Yeah.
now you see it in an hour.
Exactly. So I think the Oscars was, once people started to care, it was the most immediate place for these designers to have worldwide exposure to the 2 billion people that watch the Oscars around the world. So it just happened. And I remember the sort of seminal times for me were at my first job at Vogue in New York between 1995 and 1998. And Bronwyn, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was in 1998, the year that Uma Thurman wore the lilac Prada dress.
Around that.
All right,
around
so
that,
she was
a bit
nominated
earlier,
for
I think,
her
actually.
role.
Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, in Pulp Fiction, which was the year before in 1997. And that was something that we all identified, the black wig and the bangs. And so here she is showing up at the Oscars in her natural self, this sort of ethereal Swedish blonde former model turned it girl actress in what was at the time, it was so shocking in its simplicity. It was just a pale lilac chiffon, double layered scoop neck gown, just an A-line gown. There was no embellishment, no nothing, and she had this perfect matching chiffon. It wasn't even a wrap. It was almost just like this little thing around her shoulders.
Branded by Prada, but actually made by Barbara Tiefenk.
That's right.
Because the story behind that dress is that Prada sent a dress, and this is an interesting thing about the difference, and we'll get to this with Monica in a minute, but The difference between models, and I think it took a while for designers to cotton on to this, was that actresses were a lot different and rarely sample size, had huge long bodies, and the dress allegedly that Prada had sent to Uma Thurman was way too short. The material was too hot for her to wear in Los Angeles.
5'11", I believe.
Yeah, but
in
it was
bare feet.
sorted out in a costume shop in LA. But
Which is another thing that where most of, if you wonder, you think about these dresses being made in some atelier in Paris, a lot of them get sorted out at Ella House of Tailoring on La Cienega. I mean, that's where they actually get put together. They come here in a FedEx box, and there's a Russian master tailor here who's actually sewing the dress.
But Versace actually sends,
The
couture
tailors.
days to the
Yes.
Beverly Hills Hotel. And
Or people do that now.
you could walk in and Chanel does the same thing and see all these little ladies sewing a gown.
I think actually Valentino started doing that with Sharon Stone when she was so picky about everything she was wearing that they would send, and he so wanted to dress her that he would send over like the tailor from Italy. But thank you, Marcy. Monica, swooping out of nowhere, I would say, certainly I was hanging out at Decades on Melrose Avenue for the BBC, and I met someone named Rachel Zoe Rosenzweig, who then became Rachel Zoe. You wrote a book with Rachel. It's now a bestseller. It became a bestseller in the New York Times. What did she do aside from, what did she do that was different and interesting that wasn't being done, which basically fueled the Rachel Zoe industry?
I think that Rachel was very savvy in that she pegged a signature look, and we all know it. It's Bianca Jagger at Studio 54. It's this effortless 70s, breezy LA style. And she gave the actresses that she dressed that image. Instead of just dressing them in a beautiful dress, she created an image. She made them into maybe not these icons, but she created something that was a touchstone for us. It was a very cool look, and she branded it, trademarked it, went on to create her own collection, and she has, collections as a designer, and she's followed suit and, kept consistent with that look. So I think, in addition, she also accessorized her clients very well. And it's like every blogger now or every website has a fashion critic. It could be Grandpa Ernie in the basement, but somebody is writing about fashion, and they're writing about the accessories and the shoes and the bags. And I think Rachel wisely put that package together. And again, it was always consistently in that image of, again, Bianca Jagger, someone who would be hanging out with Halston. She really made these actresses look glamorous, and I think she gave them clothes that are easier to wear in their wearability. I mean, they're these sort of caftans. Not everything was fitted. You didn't see actresses, sort of in tight dresses, feeling uncomfortable. It was this look that I think was easier to carry off. I just wanted to bring up also, Marcy, what we were saying about the red carpet becoming the red runway. I think it's fascinating. Actresses are in our homes when we watch television. We watch movies and we fall in love with these characters. So unlike models who we don't know, and they have bodies that we'll never attain or maybe even want to attain, these actresses feel like people we know. So it's become even more so of a runway because we feel like these are our friends. It's like going up to a girlfriend and saying, "What are you wearing?"
Yeah.
I can get that. I don't know that you would run up to a supermodel and ask that, but when you see it on television, we feel like we know these women.
Or
we
even
love them.
even more surreal if you bump into them at the governor's ball. But Merle, you knew the late Lorenz Scott, who started out as a stylist. She was the fashion consultant for the Oscars, I can't remember when, at the turn of the new millennium. But she had a very interesting point of view and was creating Nicole Kidman and Sarah Jessica Parker in her image.
Very much, and actually before Rachel Zoe, Lorenz Scott invented herself as this, mega Hollywood stylist. She was incredibly glamorous, as we now know, because we've all read everything about her. She was 6'2", and she walked around in gowns all day. She was living in a fantasy, and she managed to, when you have Nicole Kidman and Sarah Jessica Parker, the hottest actresses, arguably, of the 90s, and even into the millennium. And they were both are very thin, and they both know a lot about clothes. And the one year that Nicole Kidman wore this John Galliano for Dior chartreuse chinoiserie dress, it was so fashion forward. Of course, Women's Wear put it on the cover, and we'd seen it or something like it in a couture show. So I knew what was coming. Everyone else was sort of horrified, and Joan Rivers was even like, "That color makes me puke." She didn't get it, clearly. But Loren also dressed Julianne Moore, several other people, and she made people into glamazons. I mean, Nicole Kidman, already a glamazon, but Sarah Jessica kind of took her Sex and the City character even further. They all got to wear the most desired things, which was John Galliano for Dior and Chanel Couture, and they wore couture, which that was the early days of somebody making you something just for you, for the Oscars, because before that it came out of collections. So to wear something only made for you was a very big deal.
And she was also a costume designer, actually. And what is it, Monica, that you think a costume designer can bring to a red carpet look? You were mentioning that Janie Bryant has done work.
Right. Well, there are certain actresses, that their bodies defy a sample size. An example would be Christine Hendricks, who's beautifully voluptuous. And I know that Janie Bryant has designed for her on the red carpet because, as you said earlier, she knows her anatomy so intimately. I just interviewed Mindy Kaling from the Mindy Project for a story, and she was telling me that her costume designer, Sal Perez, who does a great job on that show, has been designing for her. So I think you'll see more and more actresses that maybe can't turn to designers to get something sent to them, or would rather work with someone who, again, they feel comfortable with, who knows their curves, making them pieces. I mean, Edith Head did that too.
Absolutely.
So I think we could see more of it as the profile of costume designers rises, and they'll emphatically tell you they're not stylists, they are designers. So I think they'd love to get into that game, and Janie Bryant is designing now shoes and dresses, so it's an open field.
And certainly, I think back to the Prada, Marcy, that you mentioned that Uma Thurman wore, and I remember Barbara T. telling me about the making of that dress and why she got the wrap and very simple jewelry and the right kind of handbag, because what a costume designer knows, which sometimes I think they know today, stylists, but I don't think they knew back then, was that you had to look like perfection from every angle, or else you would have the late Joan Rivers on your not on your side.
And I would just say, even a costume designer knows when she's dressing, for instance, Janie Bryant dressing the three principals of Mad Men, she knows that in a crowd, these women have to stand out on screen. So when they're dressing someone for the red carpet, they know that the competition is stiff there as well. So they're choosing either colors or silhouettes that they think will stand out on camera. And it really is all about on camera. People aren't at the Oscars. They're looking at pictures or watching it on television. So they have a decided advantage in that way.
I think something really interesting that happened with the onset of Loren Scott, and actually I think Rachel Zoe didn't go there, but it was this phenomenon of fashion lines that came directly from the red carpet. Marchesa. Do you want to talk about, she was going to the Oscars with Harvey Weinstein, Georgina Chapman.
So
Tell us about that.
All of you, I'm sure, know Marchesa is designed by two women, Georgina Chapman and Karen Craig, and Georgina happens to be married to Harvey Weinstein. So, go figure if your girlfriend and now wife, is designing some beautiful evening gowns. You've got a suggestion for every actress that's in your movie, a suggestion to wear to the Oscars or to some important red carpet. So, I mean, it's a great synergy, as you might call it. That's one example. Anything else?
Well, it's interesting because Marchesa was born on the red carpet. It wasn't even in a store. And then they wound up with a clothing line, and they could do more day wear, but they used the red carpet completely to build their brand. And also that Prada dress, I mean, Prada was in the US and making sportswear, but nobody really knew what it was. And after that, Prada became a super brand.
Exactly. That's thank you for and that's the second point I was going to bring up was, who really knew what Prada was besides sort of dowdy leather luggage before then, or at least people in my generation. And then all of a sudden, you see Uma Thurman, and obviously we covered the runway collections in WWD prior to 1997, but it was sort of the harbinger of this turnaround for the brand, and all of a sudden it became this cool, artsy, somewhat minimalistic sort of, but very artsy and bold, line. And I think that really happened in part because of the traction it got from the Oscars and the impact that Uma Thurman had, and basically the brand awareness that her image brought to the House of Prada.
I've got a question for all of you. I guess the age of the stylist and the designer line, like the Marquesas, the Lorenz Scotts, these lines that came directly from the red carpet, the next step was really this explosion whereby every possible event now is just worked for getting a star like, say, a Lupita Nyong'o traction. Tell me anything you'd like to say about the preparation. Merle, what are they doing? When do they start? Okay, let's say you're going to Telluride. You know you're going to get nominated for an Oscar. What's an actress doing at that stage? Who's she working with?
I wrote a story, I think a couple years ago, called The Psychology of the Dress. And the fact is that if you're Lupita Nyong'o, a really good example because she just exploded, won an Oscar, became a fashion star all in 1 year. You know that you need an image, you need a sort of brand, and nobody knows who you are, and you hire a stylist. That's the very first thing you do.
Who pays?
Well, if you're very lucky, the studio, particularly in the case of 12 Years a Slave, it knows it's going to be an Oscar movie, and so they're willing to spend the money. Some small movies don't have that issue, but Lupita wants to show people that she's glamorous and a star, because in that movie, she's downtrodden and, looking scared and not a glamorous woman at all. So she needs to turn around the image, and she needs to be a glamour figure to get our attention and also to possibly get some other glamorous roles. So she develops this relationship with a stylist named Michaela Erlanger, who lives in New York, and they made each other stars. When she turned up, first of all, I would go to the Palm Springs Film Festival, which is kind of the first major event of the year. She wore this gold cocktail dress.
Beautiful.
Fabulous figure.
I loved it.
Fabulous figure. The best color work for her skin, and beautiful makeup, and she was shy and sweet, and it's like, here's this girl we know nothing about, and in minutes she's a fashion star. That was completely solidified at the Golden Globes when she wore this red-caped Ralph Lauren dress, which I saw come down the runway, and I thought, that's an interesting dress, that whole cape idea. But then you have the contrast of her skin tone, and nobody else really wearing red that night. Red is the loudest, most attentive color. And so now at Telluride, even at Cannes, that your movie is going to be a very big deal. You immediately go into the mode of, I need to look amazing and I need to look different at every single event.
Monica, what kind of intel does a stylist have to do to make sure that someone else is not wearing red? I think there was a huge kerfuffle a few years ago. Kirsten Dunst turned up in a Chanel that someone else wore. She was freaking out. It was all over the sort of fashion pages.
That Reese Witherspoon had
Yeah,
worn
and there was
the year
also-
before.
What are they doing behind the scenes? Like, how do they have assistants going and spying? Like, what's going on?
Actually, it's the design houses that really keep track. I know, for instance, from working with Rachel on the book, months beforehand, she's in touch with the houses in Europe to find out what's available, what will look good on her client. She's seeing what's coming down the runway beforehand, or what will come down the runway. I think there is some cross-referencing, but you had the example, it was Anne Hathaway who was supposed to wear Valentino,
Oh, yes.
and at the last minute did not, and it had been announced that she was wearing Valentino, so it was credited. Right now, journalists we used to get bulletins the day before, and then wisely, the publicists for the fashion houses decided to wait until these women actually got out of the limos wearing the dresses, because there were too many instances where they didn't wear it. And it was so embarrassing and mortifying to have that out there and then realize that
Sharon Stone in a Gap turtleneck.
Yeah, so she decided not to wear the dress.
That actually wasn't by Gap, FYI.
Yeah.
It was from the Limited. They pretended it was from the Gap. because of charity.
But I think that the stylists should spend less time talking to each other because I see way too many trends on the carpet. I mean, we see it either dark greens in, or this particular silhouette, or peplum. It'd be so nice to see less of that. And I think there was a time when we did see more individual looks. Now it seems like everyone gets together a week beforehand and decides, we're going to take the safe route, we'll all do peplums, we'll all do forest green. Even with jewelry, we see everybody mimicking each other. And I'm not sure exactly who's behind that. Marcy, maybe you know.
I don't think people are getting together per se. If anything, I still think it is very competitive and very secretive to an extent. But I think things just get into the fashion zeitgeist, maybe. I mean, some things more than they should. But I agree with Monica in that I do think that there needs to be more individuality on the carpet.
How do we get there?
That's a really good question. Kate Blanchett, no matter what she wears, has a strong fashion personality. Even if she's wearing a big lace gown, she still looks like her, the hair and makeup. I think the people with the strong personality, Charlize Theron is an amazing example. Tilda Swinton is the best example of someone with such a strong personality, and it transfers to fashion, and she loves fashion. And so it's always going to look, amazing. It's not an actress's job to know what everybody else is wearing. It's the stylist's job. And, it's become now that actresses need to be sort of like models, and they need to know about fashion, and yet they also need to know how to act, and they need to be working. Jennifer Lawrence does not have time to be perusing a runway.
Yeah.
But she doesn't really care. That's the thing. A lot of these people don't care, and so they wear something their stylist tells them to wear as trendy. And
Why does not never work? It never works.
I can tell you this from direct experience, as can, we've done this so many years. You can tell when you're talking to a woman at her standing 6 inches from you on the red carpet if she's uncomfortable in her dress or not. And you can also tell when she loves her dress and when she's owning that look and the way she's projecting, not just talking to me, because I don't have a camera, I have a notebook still. But when you see her speaking into the camera next to you, she's projecting it, she's owning it, and I think that shows in the photographs. And it might not have been a dress that she chose on her own, but I think the mark of a good client-stylist relationship is that the stylist has to understand what the actress likes, and the actress has to have some sort of opinion, because if they don't, then they end up looking like an uncomfortable paper doll.
Do they?
Some of them don't, as Merle pointed out, but I mean, they do know if they look ugly in a dress or if they don't like it. And sometimes it's too late and they still have to get out of the car, so therefore you just have a bad night. But, it depends on the person.
Yeah, I think more so they know.
We're not doing questions yet.
I mean, when you watch the red carpet, if Ryan Seacrest asks an actress what she's wearing, she'll tell you what Essie color she's wearing on her nails.
15.
I mean, nowadays they really do know, and I think part of that is there's agreements made. I'm going to be sure to publicize it. Some of them are just very gracious and want to give credit, but
sometimes they come with a little notepad.
yeah, they'll just write it on their wrists.
They know what they're wearing.
Well, that's kind of refreshing. I mean, we've got 15 minutes, but I have a few more questions. I mean, I think something really interesting happened last year on the red carpet, and that was the coming of age, I would say, of Elizabeth Stewart, a fantastic stylist who has worked for the New York Times in her previous life. And it came down to her styling Sandra Bullock, Kate Blanchett, Julia Roberts, who else? Did it work? Did it, I would like your opinions. Did it work for all of them? Could you see, was one maybe neglected? I mean, can we be honest here?
Some of those women have incredible style, and some of them don't. And Julia Roberts is Julia Roberts. You cannot tell her what to wear.
Yeah.
So
She looked great.
She really, every event she looked very different. She was bold. She wore a leopard mini in Palm Springs. She wore a pink jumpsuit. Elizabeth also dressed Kate Blanchett.
Yeah, I honestly felt it a bit lacking. I thought she had all the right labels, which Kate Blanchett's very directional. So she had on Christopher Kane, Riccardo Tisci for Givenchy. But in a way, I kind of got the feeling, is she a bit over it? I don't think it
I
fitted.
don't think so, but I also think that you're investing the stylist with too much power and accountability. Maybe Elizabeth Stewart had
Why?
another option that someone decided not to go with. I
Right.
mean,
I
they
will
can only
point
make
out-
suggestions.
Exactly.
They're not
and
dictators.
Back to
Right.
the behind the scenes
Interesting.
thing that you had mentioned in the, at the beginning. Actresses do have backup dresses most of the time. Okay, so sometimes they have to go on the carpet in a dress they don't love, but everyone's always got a backup. I mean, that's just
How many?
red carpet
More
101.
than one.
Yeah, at least one. So a stylist can do all she can to bring those best choices and, to the hotel room or the home. But at the end of the day, it is the actress who's going to reach for this one, whatever she's feeling that morning. She could have thought the night before, I'm going to go with the sleek satin mermaid gown, but she wakes up in the morning and maybe she just feels like she wants the princess skirt. I mean, you
The
don't know.
actress, though, and her manager, and her publicist, and her boyfriend, and her mother, and her husband.
Right, it's a team, by committee.
Now, Merle,
Sometimes her kids, too.
another really interesting late-breaking phenomenon is that actresses who have been paid by brands, the biggies, to wear their dresses on Oscar night and for the big ceremonies like the Golden Globes, have started using those in-between affairs like the Palm Springs Film Festival or lunch or the BAFTA cocktail to wear something a little bit more interesting. Tell us about that.
Well, I was going to say that Kate Blanchett wore Armani to the two big shows, the Golden Globes and the Oscars. Not that they weren't lovely and beautiful, but Giorgio Armani gave $1 million to the Sydney theater that Kate Blanchett and her husband ran.
Nice one.
Yeah, so she was fairly obligated to do that, and yet she wore very avant-garde clothes to the SAGs and to other things, Givenchy, very different looking. So, there's a lot of influence of big brands, obligations, payback, etc.
But there's a bit of Erdem out there, Christopher Kane. You're seeing Roxanne Delancich. You're seeing Marcy.
Rosie Asselin. There's a lot of great new names, even designers who've only been around for a season or two. So I think that there are stylists, particularly like Michaela Erlanger, who worked with Lupita and Michelle Dockery, who just sort of exploded onto the scene because she had those two girls last year, and it all made such an impact. That are less tied to these brands because they haven't been in the industry as long as, say, an Elizabeth Stewart. So their eyes are just more open and perhaps just more fresh because they're not bound by what we always did 10 years ago. And so they'll find a new designer, and if they have a client who is also adventurous, then I think that's sometimes the most exciting thing that can happen.
I would just quickly add, we haven't talked at all about musicians, and I think
Yeah.
the red carpet may be there to form an image. Maybe it's a brand partnership, but I think it's also become a venue for shock value. And I think
Yeah.
that's fun. I think Rihanna has great style, and she chooses up-and-coming designers. And Lady Gaga, Miley Cyrus, this is a place when musicians don't have an album out or they're not touring, they can get on a red carpet wearing something outrageous and get some press. And I think it's really refreshing. I remember what MIA wore to the Grammys years ago when she was, I think, 8.5 months pregnant. I like watching the music shows for that reason.
And Merle, you started something at the Hollywood Reporter, a power list issues of the 25 most powerful. Tell me why you did that and what's the reaction? Are people jostling to get in there?
Well, the Hollywood Reporter has a history of doing power lists of women in the business, of lawyers. So it kind of went part and parcel. And I remember when Janice Min said to me 4 years ago, we should rate the stylists. And I went, we can't do that.
Why?
But that was her answer. Why not? And, what is your quantification of who's the number one and who's number 6? We based it all on who was around during most of the year, award season in Cannes, and the best looks, and we really kind of worked out a system. In the first year, people were kind of freaked out. They didn't know it was coming, and I think they kind of resented it. The second year, they were all having their agents and publicists, and they have publicists calling us going, you should consider so-and-so, you should consider so-and-so. And then the third year, they started saving the date so that they wouldn't have a booking that day. And then Kate Young, Leslie Fremar, Elizabeth Stewart, the last three number ones, all have deals with, you know, the H&Ms of the world. They make really strong money off these numbers.
My final question really is it fun for these women? Are they having fun out there? I mean, I would say half the time, no. It's like a big deal. But is it fun?
I think for some of them it is. It's like women who like to go out on a date and women who don't. I mean, I think some of them really enjoy the ritual of getting dressed up and they enjoy the attention. I think some of them, no way. I remember interviewing Julie Christie once, and she's disgusted by it. I mean, hates every single second of it. And I revere her style, but I think there are two camps, right?
I agree, and you know, I think it's all good and fun when you're getting ready at home for 4 hours with champagne and your kids and your boyfriend, and it's probably fun the first 15 minutes of the red carpet. But what a lot of people don't realize is it takes about 50 minutes to get down the entire red carpet. So it's maybe not so fun for you or your feet by the end, and then you're also sitting in a live theater for 3 hours, and then you're then having to go to the governor's ball
And
do
possibly
more.
lose.
Exactly. So
And wearing
it's all good and fun in the
uncomfortable
beginning.
underpinnings.
Oh, that's another thing. You need
It
those
should be more
underpinnings.
fun, though. I hope
Yeah.
it can become fun again, because I think there was a time when Cher showed up and that Bob Mackie and whoever was sitting behind her cursed her.
Audrey Hepburn, actually. It was Audrey Hepburn. Yeah.
It would be wonderful to see.
And she actually, Audrey Hepburn loved it.
So tiny, I can only imagine.
We're going to open up the floor to questions, if anyone has any. Yes?
I have been watching Amal Al-Din Clooney.
Is there a mic for the...
You might have to just repeat it.
Okay. Sorry. You've been watching Amal Clooney?
Yes, George Clooney's wife
Yes.
is so incredibly stunning.
Uh-huh.
What do you think her impact is going to be on what we're talking about tonight? What do you foresee?
Or are weddings the new red carpet?
Well, she was the most popular Halloween costume among women. So that's something to tell you. But
Really?
Yes, but you know, when we saw her the first time and it was just announced that they were getting serious and probably going to get married, she looked like a lovely career woman, clearly a very smart career woman. There was a change, and suddenly she looked
Who
amazing.
was behind that change?
Yeah, well, some great stylist, clearly. I don't.
Anna Wintour? I would say Anna Wintour.
It could be.
Working the magic. Question in the back from the very eager person. Go.
It was, I believe, are you talking about 2002, the year that Hallie won,
Yeah.
wearing the Elie Saab couture? That's the dress you're talking about,
Yeah.
with them embroidered. Well, actually, Mr. Saab was just in town last night. Merle and I were at a dinner with him. And that was a couture dress, so it was made for her, but it was something that was in his couture show as well. And she was working, I believe, with Deborah Wachneen at the time.
Philip Bloch.
Oh, no, it was Philip. You're
Hello.
right. I'm sorry. It was Philip.
He would freak out.
Sorry, Philip. I love you. I didn't. That was a mistake. But I thought that, you know, it was a big moment for her.
Well, you know the story behind that dress, don't you?
Well, there's a lot of stories, but basically nobody had ever heard of Elie Saab, and not only that, while he does show in Paris, he's Lebanese, so the Middle East hadn't really cracked the code of fashion at that point. It really has now, with Zuhair Murad and Elie Saab, and they're both couture. But Hallie was really meant to wear at least one other thing, and there were lots of rumors about money changing hands. That's all.
He told me he pulled everything in town. It was like the height of Oscar madness. She had a room full of dresses. And that dress actually, he customed it for her, apparently, by putting the more lavish embroidery so that it would be somewhat concealed. And I think actually that dress does raise a very interesting issue about design. Is there is an issue of modesty on the red carpet. I mean, actresses do want to show off their bodies, but they do need to look refined, and because there are stalkers out there who will drive them crazy, actually. But did you?
No, I was going to say, I think the Halle dress was also very polarizing because people either loved it or they hated it. And obviously some people loved it and
I think,
wasn't
you know,
everyone's favorite.
you know, and what Lupita Nyong'o, a
But she
woman of
loved it.
color, can really take a lot of risks, like with the colors they can wear on the red carpet. I mean, Lupita, the United Colors of Lupita Nyong'o was this phenomenal tableau that MTV did, a whole spectrum of images of her on the red carpet just to show how many different colors she wore at the Oscars. And Halle Berry always does take a really interesting, she always looks fantastic and something very different and unique, actually.
It's a very good point that color on the red carpet really stands out. And, you know, it can stand out badly sometimes, but most of the time it works because a lot of people want to play it safe and wear black. Look at Jennifer Aniston, like
Boring.
a beautiful woman, great figure, just black. It doesn't. She looks absolutely the same at every event, right?
Sometimes navy.
Red.
She does
red.
delve into navy.
She goes red. The red Valentino. Yes.
I was wondering how you see future technology affecting fashion, like smart clothes, nanotechnology being integrated into clothes, and if you see that happening and stylists will use that for red carpets.
I'd actually, I mean, I will throw it open, but I do feel very passionately against it because I think that haute couture and the work that goes on in Los Angeles is about manual workmanship. And I think that really is about the value of what couture is, that it's thought up in someone's head and realized through a sketch that someone makes with their hands. Women, these petit mains who work behind the scenes at couture houses, spend hours laboring over these dresses. That's why it's so really depressing for them when an actress just tosses it aside like a piece of burnt toast or whatever, you know, not realizing what actually goes into it. So, you know, I'm all for technology, but personally, I really would like to see, you know, the craftsmanship rule, and that is the wonderful thing about the Oscars, is it is a forum for craft, which is what the fashion industry is based on. Anyone? Yes, the gentleman in the orange T-shirt. And what's your point?
Well, they're very innovative
Sure.
because of the competitive nature of textiles. They've invested tremendously to stay ahead technologically. And the fabrics and the materials that are coming out of Switzerland are absolutely fantastic. And I would think that a designer would be employing the materials used as much as the shape and form of the
Well, I think actually, the great couture textile house was based in Zurich. It was called Abraham, and he invented. His name was Gustav Zumstig, and he actually invented Gazar for Balenciaga. I mean, he made all the great textiles for Saint Laurent, everyone else. But I think actually, what's really special about when a couturier or a designer in New York or anywhere else makes a dress, they're usually developing that fabric independently for that dress. You mentioned the Nicole Kidman Galliano amazing dress, which I think is probably one of the best dresses ever on the red carpet. That fabric was made at the House of Dior. These are fabrics that are made from these are dresses that are made from the ground up.
Something I've always loved about Women's Wear Daily, and it's the only place I've ever seen this, is when it reviews the couture, it names all the fabrics.
Yes.
It's mind-blowing.
And Brahman, I love that you had that fun, fast fact about Switzerland, Zurich. I was like, what?
I knew him, actually.
No
I knew
wonder
him.
you're leading this panel.
I knew him. And, you know, it's a pity his fabric house is no longer. And that is technology encroaching on it. But, I mean, I say leave 3D printing off. I mean, sure, if they want to dress like the cast of Dumb and Dumber, but I'm not up for it.
They're not going to the Oscars.
And on that note, okay, we've got 1 minute. Hat. Person in the hat? Yeah, an unknown, yeah. Yeah. Marcy.
Oh my goodness.
How would an unknown place a dress on the red carpet? Good luck.
I think increasingly, stylists are gatekeepers as to, what designers get in front of their clients. So that's one way to do it.
Stylists.
It's definitely better than just mailing it to someone's
Twitter?
office or tweeting it. Yeah.
Twitter. Tweet to Kim Kardashian. She'll do anything.
It's not easy. So, listen, that's a great question, but it's difficult. It's difficult even for someone like an Armani to get a certain dress on
Yeah.
somebody. So, think about that.
It takes a village. Final question? Interesting. Very interesting. And?
So very often they had one-stop shopping. I mean, stylists and designers would come in and set up shop in the hotels, and the celebrities would come in. I don't know if that's happening.
Oscar Mart. It was like known as Oscar Mart. What does it happen anymore? What was the question? This lady was working at L'Hermitage, which was once known as Oscar Mart. All these hotels would have designers come in, set up in suites, showing their wares to anyone going to the Oscars. Could beg, borrow, or never buy. But
The man who invented that called himself the Sultan of Swag.
who was that again?
Ted Kruckle. Yep.
It
doesn't
happen anymore.
it doesn't
was like a
happen anymore.
phenomenon. Why?
It was tacky and disgusting, and
got
it
a
went
free
way
Jimmy
over the
Choo's.
top. In the beginning, it was kind of.
But have you been to the
lovely.
Martinez in Cannes? It
Well,
still
yeah,
does happen
Cannes
there.
does have that.
On the 7th floor.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Okay, that it's been delightful. Mary, I just want to say thank you again to Mary Ta for the wonderful and DIEM.
I just want to say I'm Darren Gold, the chair of the West Hollywood Design District. I want to thank you all, Bronwyn and ladies, for a wonderful panel, and Mary Ta, our host. And I want to thank all of you for DIEM, for participating in DIEM and being with us today. And of course, Mallory and Francis, who curated an amazing day of talks. And please join us next door at Mary Ta's other showroom, Minotti, for a closing party. Thank you all.